Hey students, this is Coach Brian. I want to talk to you about decimals to percents and percents to decimals. Converting a decimal to a percent and a percent to a decimal. Now, if you notice down here, from decimal to percent, the R is huge, and that's because we want you to focus on the R in percent. If you want to get a percent and you have a decimal, then there's a simple trick. So, looking at our notes, step one, we use the Dr. Pepper or the decimal W, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but you're going to move the decimal two places to the right, hence the big R, the percent. If I want a percent, I'm going to move to the right, which is essentially multiplying by 100. That's what happens when you move the decimal two places to the right. Step two, just add the decimal sign. Now, why we call it Dr. Pepper, I'd like to enhance this a little bit. DP, Dr. Pepper, the decimals on the left and the percents on the right. Well, let me expand on that. So let's say you write out the word Dr. Pepper, Dr. and Pepper. If I want to get a percent, I'm going to go to the right. If I want to get a decimal, I'm going to go to the left. Now, why it's a decimal W is because if you look at this, it looks like a W. Okay, so let's do a few examples. Okay, we have 35 hundredths, and we move that two places to the right. The decimal is now here, so it's like 35.0%. Okay. On example 2, the decimal's here, move it two places to the right. Now we have 0.7%. Okay. 2 and 345 thousandths. So we're going to go twice to the right, and you have 2 and 234.5%. And the last one is 3. Now the decimal is here. We do a decimal W, but we're going to need to fill in some zeros there, so it would become 300%. So that's all there is to it to convert a decimal to a percent. You're just moving the decimal two places to the right. Percent. Now let's say you have a percent, but you want a decimal. So look at this decimal. It has a huge L. So you can probably guess what we're going to do now. So step one, write the percent without the percent sign. We just chop that off. We'll put a decimal if we don't have one in our percent. Some percents have decimals in them, some don't. Step 3, we're going to use the Dr. Pepper or the decimal W, and we're going to move two places to the left. So again, two places to the left. That's one way to look at it. You have a D here and a P here, so you go like that. Or Dr. Pepper. For me to get over here to the D, I got to go two places to the left, like that. All right, so let's look at example 1. We started with 77%. We're going to get rid of that, and then the decimals here, move it two places to the left, and you have 0.77. All right. In this example, you have 150%. Okay, so put in a decimal, move it two places to the left, and you have 1.50. So if I have 150% of a hot dog, excuse me. Oh, sorry. About 150% of a hot dog, I have 1.5 hot dogs. All right. So in this case, I have a weird number. I have 0.37%. 37 hundredths of a percent. So get rid of that. Here the decimal's already there, but we're going to move it two places to the left. Resist the temptation in these to move it to the right, because it looks like you should want to move it to the right. But you're going to end up with 0.0037 or 37 thousandths. Here we got 2%, and the decimal would be here. Same thing, we're moving it to the left, so we're going to have to put in a 0. So it's going to be 2 hundredths. And again, that's moving from a percent to a decimal, as though you need a decimal, you're going to move to the left to get a decimal. Okay, we're going to go on to what if you got to go all the way from a percent to a fraction. Now let me say that generally speaking, it might be more simple for you to go from a percent, make it a decimal, and then make your decimal into a fraction. That's a tried and true method. But in some cases, you can do this in one step. So let's look at a few of those. So you would write your percent without the percent symbol and then make it a fraction over 100, and then step 3, as always, simplify. So 18% is simply 18 over 100, and if you divide that by 2 to simplify, you have 9/50ths. 120% is 120 over 100. Now that's an improper fraction, so we would make that 1 and 20 over 100ths, and you would simplify that to 1 1/5. 5% is basically just 5 over 100, and it is 1 over 20. And example 4 is 4.5%. We're going to wait a second. If you do 4.5 over 100, I have a decimal in my fraction. I don't like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick that decimal over here. Okay? And if I do that here, I got to do that here. Now it's 45 over 1,000. 45 over 1,000. Now, let me go on to say that what if we had taken that 4.5%, moved it twice to the left, and made it a decimal? It would have been 0.045 or 45 thousandths. 45 thousandths. And 45 thousandths is just like that thing there. When we simplify that, divide by 5, and you get 9 over 200. Okay. All right, let's move on to from fractions to percents. Now, the logical thing to do is to just take your fraction, make it a decimal, and then change it into percent. But that might sound easier than it actually is, or you might be sitting there listening to me and going, Coach, easy for you to say. So to go from a fraction to a percent, let's look at this. We're going to change the fraction to a decimal by dividing. So it's cowboy and the horse. Once we have our decimal, we'll do the Dr. Pepper, and it's that simple 2 steps to the, if I want a decimal, if I want a percent from a decimal, if I want a percent, I got to move 2 places to the right. Percent. So 1/8 is 0 and 125 thousandths. So all I'm going to do now is change this decimal to a percent. Bang. Done. 12.5%. Okay. Second example, 2/9. Now, some of you remember the trick for your ninths, and that's that it is the ninths are always the numerator repeating as a decimal. So 2/9 is going to be 0.22 and so on, repeating. Now to do this as a percent, you're going to at least need these 3 numbers so you can move your decimal twice to the right, like that. Now I have 22.2 repeating percent. All right. Okay. Now there's another way to do this, and this is the same thing as when we talk about moving a fraction to a decimal, because there's more than one way to change a fraction to a decimal. Cowboy and the horse always works, but in this case, sometimes you can make an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. And if you have it, if it works over 100, it's basically just a matter of dropping the denominator, keeping the numerator, and adding a percent sign. So let's look at the first example. 3 over 20 times 5. Scale factor of 5 makes it 15 over 100, and that's simply 15%. Okay, in the second example, you have 4 over 40. Now this is kind of a It's a little bit trickier. We're going to simplify this one. We're going to divide it by 4 and you'll get 1/10. And 1/10 is not a percent, it is 1 over 10. We need it to be 1 over 100. So now we're going to write that equivalent fraction over 100 by scaling it up 10 times, which will give you 10%. 10%. Okay, so that was kind of 2 steps there. In example 3, it's 4 over 25. 4 over 25, if you use a scale factor of 4, you can make that 16 over 100 and you have your percent, 16%. Now, example 4. Example 4, 3/8. Now I know what you're saying, Coach, that's one of those eighths and you always have to do cowboy and the horse. Yes, it would be more direct for you just to go ahead and do your cowboy and the horse, but have you ever thought that you're going to end up with a decimal? Now, some of you know that the decimal you end up with in 3/8 is 0.375. So the way that happens is you're multiplying this times 125. I know that's a huge scale factor and it's not mental math exactly, but when you do that, you do get a 125 over 1,000. Now we have a decimal, and if I want to take a decimal and make it a percent, remember, I'm going to move to the right 2 places. So I would have 37.5%. And that is another way to change a fraction all the way to a percent. I hope this helps. Good luck on your homework.